That is balls. Fucking hell.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another safety series video. It's been a little while, but if you missed our first few safety episodes, make sure you jump back, check them out. There's a lot of good info there. Also, don't forget to check out our website. We got FAQs on there and super sweet paramotor merch, so make sure you check it out. As you may have guessed, the topic for this video is going to be avoiding collisions with other aircraft. Seeing and avoiding, scanning procedures, and avoiding those pointy, shiny things that occupy the sky with us while we're out there on our butt fans. This specific situation is inspired by an experience that I had on my very last flight, so it's nice and fresh. We're gonna talk about it, we're gonna dig it apart, but first let's roll back and play the entire clip up to the point that we almost crossed paths.
I don't know if you guys can tell, but there is an airplane coming at me. I've been watching him for a while because he's got a nice big light up front, and we're gonna see what kind of airplane this is pretty quick. He is hauling balls though, fellas. Looks like a little jet. To be honest, I'm not very high right now. I'm just over the hills, so this guy is exceptionally low. I might actually make this a safety series in itself. Check it out. Look at that guy. Dude, that's crazy. I would be swerving to avoid him, but we're good right now. Holy shit, dude. That is balls. Fucking hell. That's the closest I've been to an aircraft like that ever.
All right, let's talk about some of the specifics of this exact situation before we get into it. So in this clip, I had actually seen that oncoming traffic probably 30 seconds before the clip started rolling. I was talking about other unrelated things, but I had my eyes out on the horizon. I saw a landing light way in the distance coming at me. Couldn't even tell what type of plane or if it was a plane at all. I just saw a shiny white orb. So I locked my eyes on it. I said, that looks like it's coming at me. I need to focus on that and just see what happens. So as time went on, it got closer and closer. I started to make out that it was a jet. I got a sense of its relative speed. And then finally, I changed the topic in the video to, hey, there's a plane coming at me. And that's where the clip starts. So my point in saying all this is that I had seen him coming from a while away. Let's just say I was about 200-300 feet higher and we were actually on a collision course. Given the amount of time I had to react, I very well could have made an evasive maneuver to avoid a collision in that situation. I could have spiraled down to lose altitude really fast, and I could have flown away to gain separation on the same horizontal plane. Another thing to point out is that obviously the GoPro wide angle lens makes things look a lot farther than they actually are. So in this actual instance, that plane was very close. With my naked eye, I could count the windows, I could see the tail and the nose and everything in perfect detail. It looked very close. I would say less than 500 feet altitude difference between us. At least in this clip, you can tell without a doubt that our closure speed was pretty quick. He was booking right along there. All right, let's just back it up to the big picture for a second. Some of you may know that I have my private pilot's license, and one thing I remember from training is the idea of visual scanning. In flight training, they make it a point to reinforce the idea of looking outside of the cockpit. They say about 90% of your time should be spent with your eyes outside the cockpit, not inside looking at gauges. Luckily for us, being paramotor pilots, we don't have any gauges to distract us from looking out. Additionally, we really have next to no blind spots. We have pretty much the most panoramic view of any aircraft I can think of. So that's really our best defense, is to have our eyes out, looking and scanning for traffic. Now the idea of scanning is kind of an art form, I think. Our eyes obviously have a very wide perspective. However, we can only really focus and see in detail in a very narrow field of view. So in flight training, they tell you basically to break up the entire field of view into 10-degree segments and look at each one for at least 2 seconds. Many people are used to driving cars, and when you're in your car, you basically look straight ahead in the direction of travel. Maybe you look a little bit wider to the sides of the road for deer or other cars that might pull out in front of you. When you're flying, it's a lot different though. You have to look in all directions. So that's a little bit of theory about the idea of scanning and keeping your eyes outside and looking around for other air traffic. I want to talk about like the situations where you're most likely to run into air traffic, but let's go back to the video real quick and then we'll come back here for evaluation.
Just for the record, I just pulled out my phone. I am at 1,700 feet, almost 1,800 feet. The park's elevation is about 300 feet. So that puts me about 1,500 feet AGL, 1,800 MSL. I'm going to continue flying this way just in case there's some sort of wacky wake turbulence over there. Now, the crazy thing is, I'm not at all unreasonably high, but that is why you have to be aware. Especially at higher altitudes, when we fly around in the valley here and you're down low, it doesn't matter too much because you're so low that general aviation traffic isn't going to be like, they shouldn't be 500 feet off the ground. But as you get higher and higher, I always try to be more and more vigilant because that's where you're going to typically encounter other aircraft. And that was a perfect example. I was scanning the horizon and seeing traffic incoming. I saw that guy long before I actually mentioned it, and that's why I was facing this direction to keep an eye on him. I have no idea what that closure speed was. He was skirting right on by, and I'm sure that on the GoPro it probably didn't look that close at all, but I'll tell you, sitting in the seat right here, that was the closest I've ever been to any aircraft, especially a fast little pointy one like that.
So back to the big picture, there's a theory called the big sky theory, and it basically says that the sky is so enormous and airplanes are so relatively small that the likelihood of two tiny little airplanes in that big sky actually crossing paths is highly, highly unlikely. Now, in general aviation, they say that most mid-air collisions or close calls happen near airports. That's where people are arriving and departing. It's a more congested airspace, and also people are tasked with more things. They're adjusting their flaps, their carb heat. They're doing things in the cockpit that takes their focus away from the actual scanning. Now, in my personal experience, I fly out of small airports pretty frequently, and I've never had a close call near a small airport. I kind of attribute this to the fact that when airplanes are arriving or departing at a small airport, they fly in a predictable manner. They're following the traffic pattern, generally 1,000 feet AGL, in a big rectangle around the runway. So when I operate from an airport, I take off and I climb out at an altitude lower than 1,000 feet until I'm far away from the airport. This pretty much avoids having any contact or crossing paths with anyone. However, I will say that if you have access to an aircraft band radio, make a simple announcement so that other people are aware that you're there and they know to look for you also. Now, once we get away from those small airports, I think there's like 3 different categories of places to think about. So basically you have the low altitude, the middle altitude, and the high altitude. And the low altitude I see as like what we do most of the time with paramotors. We're below 500 feet, generally below the hilltops, sometimes below the trees. Most of the time, airplanes are above 1,000 feet in general. Not to say that they don't stray below there, aka crop dusters every so often, but it's just, in my opinion, a less likely situation to encounter another aircraft. Now as we get to those middle altitudes, above 1,000 feet and maybe to about 5,000 feet, that's where I think a lot of air traffic travels, and that's where my head really starts to go on a swivel. Every encounter I've had with another aircraft in the sky has been in this middle range, above 1,000 feet and say below 5,000 feet AGL. Now the last bit is those super high altitude flights, say 10,000, 15,000 feet, and that's a whole world in its own. I'm not really going to cover that much in this video, but at those altitudes, you can encounter aircraft that are going really, really fast. So that means less time to identify and less time to react. Like I said in this video, I was flying at about 1,500 feet AGL, not at all an irresponsibly high altitude. That's an altitude that I would generally reach on a normal flight. I'd go up to that altitude to play around, do some acro, that sort of thing. I think a lot of other paramotor pilots operate in that range also, and I think that's really the range that you need to have your head on a swivel and be out looking for traffic. All right, I think we're gonna wrap this one up here. Just an overall summary. The idea is to just develop good habits of scanning. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you enjoyed my experience with this pointy jet. Hit that subscribe button down below if you have not yet to stick around for more adventures. We got a lot of fun stuff coming up. So until then, I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace out.